Damn, how does he know? How did Mark find out? My marriage is toast, I just know it. The courts will judge Mark to be the primary caregiver of our kids. He'll be awarded custody. I'll be a social pariah, shunned by just about everyone in this community. Forgiven by the priest with soft words, but a judging expression, just like he did with Sarah Miller. She only lasted about 3 months after her husband discovered her affair. 3 lonely months of being shunned by the rest of the community. Despite what the priest had urged, this community really hates cheating spouses. I slammed on the brakes and screeched to a halt, stopping 2 scant meters from hitting a little girl who had run onto the road, chasing a ball. She looked to be about 3, about the same age as my daughter, Lily. I was driving too fast, too preoccupied by my huge problem. The child's mother frowned at me from the curb, even though it was her fault for not supervising her kid better. I looked around and saw I was near the big park, 5 minutes from home. I suppressed my fears, drove with shaking hands another 200 meters, and pulled over before I hit someone in my distraction. How could Mark possibly think? No, that's stupid. Once Mark discovered I was having an affair, it's only logical he'd think ill of me and want to cover his bases. He might run a dinky little graphic design service from home, but that doesn't mean he's stupid, far from it. Once he found out, of course he would think it wasn't my first and get the kid's DNA tested. But how did he find out? Nathan and I have been so careful. Thoughts of Nathan reminded me. I picked up my phone and navigated to Nathan, a recently started work colleague. Stick as close to the truth as possible was my motto. I texted, "Can you talk?" While waiting for a reply, I continued to kick myself. Why, oh why did I let that smooth-talking little jerk seduce me? No, come on, be honest, that's not fair. Why we slept together? The first time wasn't seduction, and is perfectly explainable. It happened while we were out of town. We just spent 2 whole days negotiating an exhausting deal, celebrated with too many champagnes, and fallen into bed together. If I had stopped there, it would have been fine. I would have a secret that I would rue to my final day, a grave secret that could only hurt my husband and family. But I, or should I say we, didn't. We'd both been ensnared by the excitement of sleeping with someone, different after 10+ years of marriage, the allure of the illicitness of it all, the thrill of the naughtiness of it, the superiority of knowing we were fooling our spouses, 2 people who knew us so well, or not successfully hiding it as it turns out. My thoughts were interrupted by the ding of a text from Nathan. Finally, having dinner with my wife and the kids. What's up? Well, misery loves company, they say. He knows. Mark knows about us. How had Mark found out? We'd been incredibly careful. Only got together when we were away, and then only if we could get adjoining rooms. We never walked into the same room door together, and always used protection, even the first time. Made absolutely sure we behaved normally in public, and when we were home with our respective spouses. Another ding. Hell, my wife is acting normally, so he hasn't told her. Do you think he will? How angry is he? Don't know, we haven't spoken yet. I did a runner as soon as I discovered he knew, I replied. This time I didn't have to wait long for a reply. Ding, please beg him not to tell my wife. The selfish little jerk, destroying my marriage so long as he is unaffected. I have a good mind to tell his wife if Mark doesn't. Like I say, misery loves company. So how were we discovered? I'd made sure my love for my husband hadn't suffered. Not introducing any new positions or techniques I'd learned from Nathan. To say intimacy with Nathan was vanilla and uninspiring would be an understatement. He was smaller, lasted less time, and was not nearly as experimental as my Mark. In fact, if it hadn't been for the illicitness of it all, it wouldn't have lasted the 7 months and 6 liaisons it actually had. How unlucky. We'd been discovered right before I terminated our affair after our next trip in 2 weeks' time. Focus, Jessica. How you were discovered isn't relevant. You were found out, and now your husband trusts you so little he's getting DNA tests done on your kids. My mind flashed back to a scant 20 minutes earlier when I'd come home late, too. Late to enjoy dinner with my family. Luckily, Mark worked from home, did the school runs, and cooked dinner 6 nights a week. I was supposed to cook on Sundays, but I normally went and got takeaways. Let's just say cooking isn't one of my strong points. Walking in the door, I froze at the horrible sight. Mark sitting on one of the kitchen chairs with one of those cotton swabs on a stick, wiping it around the inside of the mouth of Lily, our 5-year-old. The open sterilized packet sat on the table. Leo, our 7-year-old, stood there too, either waiting his turn or having been done already. I'd read enough stories and seen enough TV to know I was looking at the opening act of a DNA test. My initial reaction was one of rage. How dare Mark think the kids weren't his? I wasn't or was I? Knowing I had to think how best to survive this, I just turned and fled. Just before I did, Mark turned to look at me, a neutral expression on his face. I raised my hands to my cheeks, remembering the feeling of the blood draining from them, which was a blatant confession of the truth under the circumstances. 20 minutes later, here I am, contemplating my family's and my social destruction. I knew Mark. I knew him as well as he knew himself. Once he was ready to confront me, he would do it firmly and quietly. He wouldn't want the whole town to know he'd had the horns hung on him. If I couldn't prevent him from at least divorcing me, I'd ask him to do it quietly. Just say we'd grown apart. That way, even though I'd lose the security of my marriage, I could still stay in town and see my kids. Maybe have shared joint custody. I did love them. Suddenly, I realized I was thinking like a defeatist. I was using my knowledge of Mark and assuming that separation was a given. But what if I was wrong? What if I threw myself on Mark's mercy? Told him about the forgivable first time and the regrettable continuation? He wouldn't want a divorce any more than me. Sure, his trust in me would be shattered, but I would still have the respectability and support of the community. If you do this, Jessica, you'll have to be absolutely honest with Mark. One whiff of an untruth and you'll arrive at the curb quicker than a cheetah on speed. I glanced at my watch. Just under 2 hours since my discovery. 2 hours since I'd gone from being secure in my marriage to fighting for its very life. I tapped out a quick text. I'm on my way home to beg you for forgiveness for my affair with Nathan. Please don't do anything hasty. Then I slowly headed my car home. Well, what happened after that exceeded my worst nightmare. 10 minutes after sending my text, I reached home. As soon as I pulled into the driveway, Mark stormed out the door, threw a "stay here and look after the kids" at me, and screamed off in his car. I found out later that he went straight to Nathan's house, and when my lover answered the door, broke his nose with a single punch while yelling, "Mess with my wife, will you?" Those words stopped Nathan's wife from calling the police. Between her and Mark, they extracted the full story as Nathan begged them to call him an ambulance, with Nathan claiming he was punched, but his wife claiming he fell against the wall. The police investigation went nowhere. When Nathan returned from the emergency room, the locks were changed at his house, and his wife had an online appointment with a divorce lawyer. How do I know all this? Mark came straight home and told me to pack a bag and leave. With one look at the fire in his eyes and his bruised knuckles, I did as requested and fled to a mid-range motel in town. I saw a bandaged Nathan at the breakfast bar the next day. Any hopes Mark would be quiet were dashed in the early afternoon when Nathan and I were invited into our company, CEO's office, and summarily terminated. She didn't quote any morals clause in our contracts. She just said she didn't want to employ home wrecking, bottom-feeding scumbags like the pair of us. Ouch. I could see how the immediate future was going to be when I rang all 3 divorce lawyers in our town and none returned my call. When I went to a diner for dinner, the waitress refused to acknowledge my existence. The nail in the coffin, however, was when I met up with Nathan and found out he was already being treated like a leper by family, friends, and ex-work colleagues alike. Within 2 days, spurred by a visit from the motel, manager claiming his establishment was booked out from that night, Nathan and I bowed to the inevitable and left town. We didn't want to become social ghosts. We drove for 300 kilometers and started a new life together. That didn't last long. When 2 cheaters shack up together, there is no trust. I'd never realized just how important trust was until the evening. I had to fight the urge to check his phone when he was in the bathroom. By the time I finally worked up the courage to ask Mark if I could come back to town to visit the kids one weekend, he and they had replaced me. He was a fine catch, and once he was free, The vultures, being all the bachelorettes and widows, made their interest known. By the time I got organized, there was already a dainty set of shoes under Mark's bed. My kids had a stepsister and were already calling another woman mom too. Now too old to start another family, all I can do is sit and contemplate the lonely life I have to look forward to.